I never thought I'd fall in love with a man covered in tattoos and sin, especially not while he was dying. This is the story of how a monster became a man, and how I became someone who believed redemption was real. Seattle, 2018. I was 29, 3 years into my nursing career at Mercy General Hospital. Rain hammered against the windows that Tuesday night when they wheeled him in, handcuffed to the gurney, blood everywhere, tattoos covering every inch of exposed skin. The chart read, Jake Miller, Hell's Outcasts Motorcycle Club, high security. I remember standing at the nurse's station, watching through the glass as they transferred him from the ambulance gurney to the hospital bed. Even unconscious, he looked dangerous. 6'2", maybe 200 pounds of muscle and ink. His arms were completely sleeved in tattoos, serpents winding around skulls, flames licking up toward his shoulders, and across his knuckles in bold black letters, Outcast. The EMTs were nervous. I could see it in how they moved around him, even though he was unconscious and handcuffed. One of them, a guy I'd worked with before named Tom, caught my eye and just shook his head, like he was saying, "This one's different. This one's bad news." Dr. Martinez stopped me before I entered room 412. He was a good doctor, been at Mercy General for 15 years, seen everything, but his face was serious in a way I'd rarely seen. "Emily, you need to know what you're walking into. He's a Hell's Outcast, 3 attempted murders, drug trafficking. He put 2 officers in the ICU during his arrest. If you want to request a transfer, no one will judge you." I looked at the chart again. Jake Miller, age 34, no emergency contacts listed, no family, just a note that said, federal custody pending recovery, high security risk. "What happened to him?" I asked. Martinez glanced back at room 412. Motorcycle crash on I-5. Witnesses say he was going over 100 miles an hour in the rain. Lost control, hit the median barrier, got thrown from the bike. 3 fractured vertebrae, skull fracture, internal bleeding, broken ribs, punctured lung. It's a miracle he's alive. Prognosis. Martinez's face told me everything before he spoke. If the internal bleeding doesn't kill him in the next 48 hours, he's looking at 3 months, maybe 6 if he's lucky. The vertebrae damage is severe. Even if we operate, which is risky given his other injuries, he'll likely never walk again. I stood at that threshold, my white scrubs pristine against the institutional beige walls, clutching his chart like a shield. I could walk away, request someone else, but I didn't. I chose to walk through that door. I've spent 5 years wondering if that was brave or stupid. The first thing I noticed when I entered wasn't the tattoos or the chains. It was how still he was, predator still. Even unconscious, even broken, there was something coiled about him. Like a rattlesnake that's been hurt but isn't dead yet. Like he was calculating whether I was threat or prey. The room smelled like rain and blood and something else. Fear maybe, or violence. I'd been a nurse long enough to know that trauma has a smell. It clings to people who have seen too much, done too much. I started my assessment. Vitals first, heart rate elevated but stable. Blood pressure low, concerning. Oxygen saturation good, surprisingly. I checked the monitors, adjusted the IV drip, made notes on his chart, professional, detached, the way I'd been trained. But I couldn't stop looking at the tattoos. Each one seemed to tell a story. A serpent eating its own tail on his right bicep. A skull with roses on his left forearm. Names I couldn't quite read, dates, symbols I didn't understand. And on his chest, visible through the hospital gown, a massive piece. Angel wings spreading across his ribcage. But these weren't beautiful wings. They were damaged, broken, feathers falling away. Fallen angel, I thought, how appropriate. The guard at the door nodded at me. 5 minutes max, Ms. Parker, don't get close. He woke up earlier and tried to rip out his IV. I nodded, made a final note on his chart, and left. But as I walked away, I felt something. A pull. Like a string had been tied around my chest, and someone was gently tugging it back toward room 412. I should have been terrified, but you know what I felt? Curious. This man who looked carved from violence, his chart said he was dying. 3 months, maybe less, and somehow that changed everything. Because dying people, in my experience, they stop pretending. They stop hiding. They become the most honest version of themselves, for better or worse. On day 2, I volunteered to take over his case full-time. The other nurses were relieved. Nobody wanted to deal with the biker in room 412. They'd heard the stories. Hell's Outcasts were notorious in Seattle. Drug running, gun trafficking, protection rackets. They controlled half the criminal underworld in the Pacific Northwest. But when I entered that room on day 2, Jake Miller was awake. And those eyes, piercing blue, almost grey, like the Seattle sky before a storm, they locked onto mine with such intensity, I nearly dropped the medication tray. "You're different," he rasped, his voice like gravel and honey. The breathing tube had been removed overnight, leaving his throat raw. The others look at me like I'm already dead. "Maybe that's because you keep threatening them," I replied, checking his vitals with hands steadier than my racing heart. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Pain flickered there too. He was hurting badly but trying not to show it. Fair point, Angel. Don't call me that, I'm Nurse Parker. Parker, his eyebrow raised, and I saw him wince. Even that small movement hurt. What kind of name is that? My face hardened. I'd gotten this question before, people expecting something more exotic, more interesting, the kind that's been American for generations. Mine too, he said quietly, and something in his voice made me pause. Irish heritage, way back, came over during the potato famine. Indentured servants, basically. Worked the railroads, the coal mines, died young, most of them. He paused, looking at his cuffed wrists, the chains that anchored him to the bed rails, then at me. Funny how some chains we inherit, others we forge ourselves. I finished checking his blood pressure, made notes on his chart, but his words stayed with me. Chains we inherit, chains we forge. It was more philosophical than I'd expected from a biker criminal. Your pain level, I asked, professional again. 8, he said, then corrected himself. 9, maybe 10, hard to tell anymore. I adjusted his pain medication, increased the morphine drip slightly. This should help, but you need to stop fighting it. The more you tense up, the worse it gets. Spent my whole life tensing up, he said, almost to himself. Don't know how to stop. That conversation lasted 3 minutes, but it changed everything, because in those 3 minutes I didn't see a monster. I saw someone who understood inheritance, trauma, poverty, violence, things that ran deeper than any of us wanted to admit. Over the next week I kept returning to room 412. The other nurses sent aides for routine checks, but I went myself, every shift, every medication round, every vital check. I couldn't explain it then. I still struggle to explain it now. I started noticing things, small things, how he'd close his eyes when the pain got really bad, like he was trying to disappear into himself, how his hands would shake slightly when the morphine wore off, how he never complained, never asked for help, even when he clearly needed it. And I noticed the nightmares. He'd wake up thrashing, pulling against the restraints, shouting names I couldn't understand. The guards would rush in, ready to sedate him, but I'd wave them off. I'd talk to him, low and calm, until he remembered where he was, until the nightmare released him. On day 5, Jake asked me something that broke through every professional boundary I'd ever learned. Why do you keep coming back? It's my job, I said, changing his IV bag. The other nurses send aides. You come yourself, every shift. He watched me carefully, those storm grey eyes missing nothing. Why? I stopped, turned to face him fully, and I told him the truth, because everyone deserves to be treated like a human being. Even monsters, he asked quietly. I don't know any monsters, I told him. I just know patience. Something shifted in his face. The armor cracked just a little, vulnerable, almost childlike. Read to me, he said suddenly. What? Anything, a chart, a magazine, the goddamn fire safety poster. I haven't heard someone read in. I can't remember, please. That please, it hit me like a physical thing. Men like Jake, what we think men like Jake are, they don't say please. They demand, they take, they intimidate. But he asked, vulnerable, human. That was the moment everything changed. I pulled up a chair and opened a book I'd been reading on my break. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Chapter 1. The Salinas Valley is in Northern California. As I read, he closed his eyes, and I watched as tears slid down his face, not sobbing, just silent tears tracking down through the stubble on his cheeks. The hospital monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Rain continued against the windows, and there was just my voice, his breathing, and something fragile forming between us. I read for 30 minutes, way past my shift end, way past professional boundaries, but I couldn't stop, because every few minutes he'd open his eyes and look at me like I was performing some kind of miracle, like the simple act of reading to him was the kindest thing anyone had done in years. When I finally closed the book, he said, "Thank you." Just that, thank you, but the way he said it, you'd think I'd saved his life. Against every protocol, against logic, against every boundary I'd been taught, I began staying after my shifts. I brought books from home. Steinbeck, Kerouac, Hemingway, even old poetry collections my grandmother had given me. I'd read to him for hours, and for those moments the monster the world saw would disappear. In his place was someone who could weep at stories about migrant workers longing for home. Someone who'd laugh, then wince from the pain, at Kerouac's adventures on the road. Someone who'd ask me to read certain passages again, because they meant something to him. We started talking between the reading sessions. Small things at first, where I grew up. Seattle, born and raised, where he grew up. Portland in the bad part, what made me become a nurse. My grandmother, who'd been a nurse in World War II. What made him join the Hell's Outcasts? A long pause then, survival. 2 weeks in, during a night shift, Jake asked about the poetry. Why poetry? My grandmother, I said, settling into the chair beside his bed. She'd read it to me when I couldn't sleep, about hope and change, and I trailed off, emotional. And what? He pressed gently. Redemption, how even the hardest things can soften with time, how change is always possible, even when it seems impossible. Thunder rolled outside, closer now. The storm was getting worse. Jake was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. Then he said, Emily, can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone. This is where it started, the confessions, but I didn't know then what I was really doing. I thought I was just listening, being compassionate, providing comfort to a dying man. I didn't know I was documenting evidence that would change everything. He started with his father. I was 8 the first time he broke my ribs, Jake said, his voice flat, emotionless, like he was reading a grocery list. I'd spilled milk at breakfast. Clumsy, he said, needed to learn. He grabbed me by the shirt, threw me against the wall. I heard the crack before I felt the pain. I reached for his hand instinctively, then stopped myself. Professional boundaries, but he'd seen the movement. It's okay, he said, you can, I won't hurt you. So I took his hand, and he continued. Didn't take me to the hospital, said I'd learned to be tougher. I learned all right. I learned that pain was love in my family. I learned that showing weakness meant more pain. I learned to take a beating without crying, without making a sound. By the time I was 12, I could take anything he threw at me. Your mother? I asked quietly. His hand tightened on mine. She left when I was 10, just disappeared one morning. No note, no goodbye. I came down for breakfast and my father was sitting at the table alone. He looked at me and said, she couldn't handle what you're becoming. Like it was my fault, like I'd driven her away. Jake, you were a child. I know that now, he interrupted, but I didn't know it then. I thought I was the problem. Thought if I'd been better, stronger, different, she would have stayed. We sat in silence for a while, just the rain and the monitors and our breathing. Then he continued, the Hell's Outcasts recruited me at 14. I was getting into fights at school, skipping classes, shoplifting, small-time stuff, but enough to get their attention. A guy named Razor came up to me one day, said he'd been watching me, said I had potential, said I needed a family that would actually appreciate what I could become. They gave me what I'd never had, brothers, purpose, a leather cut with my name on it. They said I was family, finally family, and I believed them. God, I wanted to believe them so badly. His voice cracked on that last part. This hard man, this criminal, this monster the world saw was crying, and I held his hand tighter. They started me small, he went on. Lookout duty, delivering packages. I didn't ask what was in them, didn't want to know. Then I moved up, collections, intimidation, I was good at it. All that rage my father had built into me, I could finally use it. Finally, someone valued what I could do. Then, after a long silence, he said, my first kill was at 16. The room went completely quiet except for the rain and the beeping monitors. I should have let go of his hand, should have called security, should have done anything except what I did, which was hold on tighter. This is the part where I should have called security, the police, someone, but I didn't. You want to know why? Because he wasn't bragging. He was confessing, actually confessing, like he'd been carrying these bodies around his entire life and finally found someone who would witness them, someone who wouldn't turn away. My hands were shaking, but I leaned forward. Tell me his name. What? Jake looked shocked, genuinely surprised. Your first victim, tell me his name, don't let him be forgotten. Something broke open in his face. Relief maybe, or release. Marcus Thompson, rival dealer, 23 years old. He had a daughter, only 2 years old. I saw pictures in his wallet after. He started crying harder now. I vomited for hours after. Went home, locked myself in the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. But I couldn't tell anyone. In the club you don't show weakness, you don't question, you don't feel, so I learned to stop vomiting, stop feeling, just became what they told me I was, what my father told me I was, what everyone told me I was, a monster. I started recording them that night, the confessions, on my phone hidden in my pocket. I told myself it was for the families, they deserved closure, they deserved to know what happened to their loved ones, but really I think I needed proof this was happening, that I wasn't imagining this connection, this transformation happening in front of me. Over the next 3 weeks, Jake confessed to 12 murders. Names, dates, locations, details that only the killer would know. I'd go home after my shifts and research them. Cold cases, unsolved murders, families still waiting for answers after years, sometimes decades. His words matched the details perfectly, every single time. There was Marcus Thompson, the first. Then Robert Chen, a Chinese restaurant owner who refused to pay protection money. Angela Martinez, a witness who'd seen too much. Tommy Sullivan, a rival club member. James Wilson, a police informant. On and on. 12 names, 12 lives, 12 families destroyed. The confession that broke me was Maria Rodriguez. Gas station clerk, he said, his voice hollow, dead. January 12, 2015, 10:30 at night. I was ordered to make it look like a robbery. She was closing up, counting the register. I came in with a mask, a gun. She looked at me right before and said, "I have a daughter. Please, I have a daughter." Like that would change my mind. Like telling me she mattered to someone would make me see her as human. He was weeping openly now, whole body shaking. But I'd been given orders. You don't question orders in the club. You don't hesitate. You don't think about who they are, who loves them, who needs them. You just do the job. Maria had a daughter the same age I was when my father started hitting me. 8 years old. I found that out later, saw it in the news, and I realized I'd made another 8-year-old's life into what mine was. Broken, alone, full of rage and pain and questions that would never get answered. I pulled the trigger anyway, he whispered. I looked into her eyes and pulled the trigger, and then I took the money from the register to make it look real. $347. That's what her life was worth to me that night. $347. I couldn't stop myself. I reached out and took his hand. Not medical, human. His hand was scarred, tattooed with Outcast across the knuckles, and it was shaking. This man who'd killed 12 people was shaking like a child. "Jake," I whispered, "why are you telling me all this?" "Because you asked me to be different," he said, meeting my eyes. "You're the first person in 20 years who looked at me and saw something worth saving, even if it's too late, even if I'm dying. You made me want to be more than what I am, more than what they made me, more than what I made myself." "It's not too late," I said, and I meant it. "You're telling the truth now. You're giving these families answers. That counts for something." "Does it?" His laugh was bitter. "Does it bring them back? Does it undo what I did?" "No," I said honestly. "Nothing can do that, but it's a start. It's choosing to be different, even when there's nothing in it for you." That night, during a thunderstorm in week 4, everything changed. Jake had just finished telling me about Maria Rodriguez again, going over every detail, punishing himself with the memory. He was crying so hard he could barely breathe. I was sitting beside his bed, and I couldn't bear his pain anymore. I stood up, leaned over the bed rail, and without thinking, without planning, I kissed his forehead. Just a soft press of lips to skin. Comfort, compassion. But then I pulled back, looked at his face, and something passed between us. Something electric and terrifying and inevitable. I kissed his lips, soft, gentle, compassionate. It wasn't passion, it was recognition. Like I was seeing all of him, the monster, the victim, the man, the child, and saying, "I see you, all of you, and I'm choosing to be here anyway." "Emily," he breathed when I pulled back. "I know this is wrong," I said, sitting back down, not letting go of his hand. "I know you're dying. I know this violates every rule. I know." "I love you," he interrupted. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and true. First time I've said that since I was 6 years old. Told my mother I loved her the morning before she left forever. Swore I'd never say it again. Never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that. But here you are, and here I am, and I love you. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face. "Don't love me, please, because I can't." "Too late," he whispered. "Way too late. You're the only good thing that's happened to me in 30 years. The only person who's ever looked at me and seen a human being instead of a weapon or a monster or a paycheck. Too late." We sat in silence, holding hands, listening to the rain, knowing this was impossible, forbidden, wrong in every way that mattered. And somehow, the most real thing either of us had ever felt. "What do we do?" I finally asked. "We keep doing this," Jake said. "You keep reading to me, I keep telling the truth. And when I die, you remember that for a few weeks I was more than what they made me. I was human again because of you. But nothing good can last when it's built on secrets and dying confessions. Nothing pure can survive in the dark." Week 7, a woman walked into room 412 while I was reading to Jake. I'd gotten comfortable, careless, let my guard down, forgot that Jake's past wasn't really past at all. Leather jacket, tattoos similar to his, though fewer, dark hair pulled back tight, but her eyes, those eyes were pure predator, cold calculation, the kind of eyes that had seen terrible things and felt nothing. "Well, well," she said, smiling like a knife, "the famous angel." Jake's face went white, actually white, all the blood draining like someone had opened a valve. "Lisa, how did you?" "Know you were here," she laughed, and it was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard. "Baby, the club always knows. Did you really think those guards could keep us out? We've got brothers in every department, every shift, every corner of this city, and we've been very curious why you've been singing like a canary to this pretty nurse." My blood went cold, literally cold, like ice water had been injected into my veins. Lisa walked closer leisurely like she had all the time in the world. "You think those cops outside protect you? Half of them are on our payroll. The other half are too scared to do anything that might get their families hurt. That recording on your phone, Emily Parker, 2847 Maple Drive, apartment 3B. She looked directly at me. "Yeah, we know everything. What you had for breakfast. What time you leave for work. That your sister lives in Tacoma with her 2 kids. Ages 4 and 6. Cute kids. Real cute." Jake lunged against his restraints so hard I heard something crack. Maybe a rib, maybe the restraint itself. "She has nothing to do with this. It's me you want. Leave her alone." "Oh, sweetie," Lisa's laugh was razors dragging across glass. "You're already dead, we both know it. The crash, the injuries, the confession, you're done. But her," she tilted her head, studying me like I was an insect. "She's got a whole life ahead. Career, family, future. Be a shame if she ended up like Maria Rodriguez. Real shame." She left before the guards even noticed she'd been there. Just walked out, calm as anything, like she'd been visiting a sick relative. After she was gone, I turned to Jake, shaking with rage and fear and betrayal. My hands were trembling so badly I had to clench them into fists. What just happened? Jake, what the hell just happened? He wouldn't meet my eyes. The man who'd looked at me with such openness, such vulnerability for weeks, suddenly couldn't look at me. "Jake," I shouted, "tell me." "The crash," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "It wasn't an accident." My world tilted, everything I thought I knew suddenly inverted. "What?" "I staged it," he said, still not looking at me. "I was trying to get arrested, get into protective custody. The club found out I was skimming money, planning to run. Not much, just enough to disappear, start over somewhere they'd never find me. But they found out. They always find out." "So you crashed your bike, on purpose?" "At 100 miles an hour in the rain," he nodded. "Figured I'd either die, which was better than what they'd do to me, or I'd get arrested and end up in federal custody. Protected, safe, away from them." "Everything you told me, I couldn't breathe, the room was spinning." "Was true," he finally looked at me desperate. "Every murder, every confession, every detail, all real. But I didn't confess for redemption, Emily, not at first. I confessed because I thought if I gave the cops enough information, they'd protect me in witness protection. I'd get out, start over, live long enough to actually die from these injuries instead of from a club execution." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, like someone had punched me in the chest. "You used me." At first, he was crying now, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Yes, at first I was using you. I thought if I got you emotionally invested, you'd help me. You'd be my advocate. You'd make sure the cops listened. But then," his voice broke, "then you became the first person who ever made me want to actually be better. Not survive, better. I fell in love with you for real, Emily. For real. I documented evidence for you," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I recorded confessions. I crossed every ethical line I have. I risked my career, my license, my freedom. For what? So you could cut a deal." "Emily, please." "They know where I live. They mentioned my niece and nephew. They threatened my family's life because of you." I turned and walked out of room 412, tears blurring my vision. Behind me, I heard him shouting my name, heard the monitors going crazy as his heart rate spiked, heard the guards rushing in, but I kept walking. I didn't speak to him for 3 days. I requested a transfer off his case, started looking at apartments in other states, called my sister, told her to be careful, watch for anything unusual. She thought I was being paranoid. I couldn't tell her the truth. I was done with Jake Miller, done with his lies, done with being the naive nurse who thought she could save a monster, done with believing in redemption. Then I got a phone call that changed everything. Elena Rodriguez, Maria's daughter, she'd been contacted by a cold case detective. Jake's confessions had reached them through an anonymous tip. They were reopening her mother's case after 15 years of nothing, 15 years of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. I drove to meet her at a coffee shop in Pioneer Square. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the whole way. What would I say to her? How could I explain? She was 23 now, working as a medical assistant at a clinic in Renton, trying to save money for nursing school. When she saw me, she was already crying. She'd been crying for days, she said, ever since the detective called. "They're saying they might finally know who killed my mom," Elena said, her voice breaking, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. After 15 years of not knowing, 15 years of wondering if it was random, if she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, if there was anything she could have done differently. She looked up at me with eyes so full of pain and hope it physically hurt to see. This detective told me someone confessed. Someone dying who wanted to make things right. Someone who gave them details nobody else could have known. The gun, the exact time, what she said, how much money was taken. Everything. She gripped my hand across the table. I can finally bury her properly. I can finally stop wondering. I can finally know that she didn't die because she was nobody. She died because someone made a choice. A terrible, evil choice. But at least now I know. And someone else is choosing to tell the truth, even though it costs them everything. That's when I understood. Jake's motivations didn't matter, not to Alina. Not to the 11 other families with open cases. What mattered was the outcome, the truth, the closure, the ability to finally move forward after years of being frozen in grief and questions. Alina deserved the truth. The 11 other families deserved it too. Whatever Jake's reasons, whatever his calculations, he was giving them something precious. Something they'd waited years for, something they thought they'd never have. I drove back to Mercy General. My hands were steady now. I knew what I had to do. I walked into room 412. Jake looked up, shocked to see me. He looked worse than he had 3 days ago. The stress, the pain, the guilt, all of it was eating him alive. Or maybe the internal bleeding was getting worse. Probably both. "How do we keep you alive?" I asked. "What?" "You heard me. You want redemption. Real redemption. Then we do this right. We get you to testify. We get these families their answers. We make sure your confession actually means something. How do we keep you alive long enough to do that?" His face transformed. Hope, disbelief, gratitude, all of it flooding in. "Emily, I don't deserve." "I'm not doing this for you," I interrupted. "I'm doing it for Alina Rodriguez, for Marcus Thompson's daughter, for the 11 other families who deserve to know the truth. If helping you is what it takes to help them, then that's what I'll do." Over the next 3 weeks, Jake and I worked with federal prosecutors. They came to his hospital bed with recorders and stenographers and files upon files of cold cases. He testified from room 412. Federal agents recorded everything, took notes, cross-referenced details, built cases. 12 cold case files were reopened. 47 Hell's Outcasts members were arrested in coordinated raids across 3 states. The club's national president, the regional vice president, enforcers, dealers, money launderers, all of them. It was the largest motorcycle club takedown in Pacific Northwest history. We got arrest warrants served. News vans parked outside the hospital. CNN, local channels, everyone wanted the story. The Hell's Outcast turned informant. The dying biker seeking redemption. Families were notified. Press conferences were held. I watched Alina Rodriguez on TV, crying as the detective announced they'd made an arrest in her mother's murder. But there was a price. There's always a price. The stress of testimony accelerated Jake's decline. Internal bleeding worsened. His organs began failing one by one. Kidneys first, then liver. The doctors gave him days, maybe a week at most. During his final week, Jake could barely stay conscious. The morphine drip was maxed out. His skin had taken on a grey pallor, but he managed to whisper something crucial to me. "Emily, promise me something." "Anything," I said, holding his hand. It was cold now, always cold. "Alina, use my testimony payment, the federal witness compensation, pay for her education, send her to nursing school, tell her," he coughed, blood on his lips, "tell her sorry won't bring her mother back, but maybe it can give her something, a future her mother wanted for her, a life her mother would have been proud of." "I will," I promised. "I'll make sure she knows." "Don't tell her it came from me," he insisted. "Let her think it's a scholarship, a grant, anything else. I don't want her to feel like she owes me anything. This isn't about redemption. It's about doing one thing right before I die." Jake Miller died on a Tuesday at 4:47 in the morning. I was holding his hand, reading him poetry my grandmother had taught me, about redemption, second chances, how even the hardest things can soften if you give them time. Dawn light was coming through the windows, pale and grey. Seattle dawn filtered through rain clouds. The monitors were slowing. His breathing had become labored over the past hour, each breath a fight. I read softly, "The stone in the river becomes smooth not by force, but by water's patient touch. What was hard becomes gentle. What was sharp becomes round. This is the way of change, slow and certain and inevitable." Jake's eyes were on my face. Even with all the pain, all the medication, he was looking at me, really seeing me. Then he said his final words, "I see her now. Maria, she's forgiving me. How is that possible?" I leaned close, tears falling on our joined hands. Because that's what we do. We forgive, we heal, we choose love even when it's illogical, even when it doesn't make sense, even when the person doesn't deserve it. We choose it anyway. His hand squeezed mine one last time, weak but deliberate, then the monitor flatlined, that single long tone that every nurse knows, the sound of ending. I held his hand for 20 minutes after he died, until it went cold, until the guards came to remove the body, because I needed him to know that someone stayed. Someone witnessed him becoming human again, even if just for those final weeks. The aftermath was brutal, more brutal than I'd imagined, and I'd imagined it would be bad. I lost my nursing license within 2 months, inappropriate relationship with a patient, ethical violations, multiple boundary crossings, failure to maintain professional standards. The board was clear, I'd crossed every line. No amount of good outcomes could excuse that. My colleagues stopped speaking to me, some overnight, others gradually, like they were afraid whatever I had was contagious. They called me the biker's whore behind my back, some to my face. I became a cautionary tale in nursing schools across the state. What not to do, how not to be. The media had a field day. Some portrayed me as a hero who helped break up a criminal organization. Others painted me as a naive fool who fell for a killer's lies. Most just focused on the salacious details. Nurse falls in love with dying criminal. Romance in room 412. The angel and the outcast. My apartment was vandalized twice. Hell's Outcasts supporters, probably. Spray paint on my door, broken windows, threatening notes. The police offered protection, but what good would that do? The club had tentacles everywhere. I moved 6 times in 2 years. Seattle to Portland, Portland to Eugene, Eugene to a tiny town in eastern Oregon where nobody knew my name or my story. I worked as a home health aide under the table. No license meant no official employment, but people always need help. Elderly folks who needed medication management, wound care, someone to talk to. It was a quiet life, lonely but safe. Then 3 years after Jake's death, I got a letter. It was from Elena Rodriguez. Somehow, she tracked me down through the Witness Protection Program liaison. She was graduating from nursing school, top of her class. She'd been accepted to a pediatric residency program at Seattle Children's Hospital. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten, tear-stained in places. She wrote about her mother, how Maria had worked 3 jobs to save money for Elena's education, how she dreamed of her daughter becoming something more than a gas station clerk in a bad neighborhood, how she died before seeing any of those dreams come true. She wrote about the scholarship that appeared out of nowhere, anonymous donor, full tuition, books, living expenses, how it came exactly when she'd given up hope of ever affording school, how she'd almost rejected it because accepting charity felt like admitting defeat. But then the detective told her the truth, not all of it, just enough, that the man who killed her mother had one final request, to help the daughter he'd orphaned, to give back something, anything after taking everything. I hated him for years, Elena wrote, even after he confessed. Even after knowing the truth finally let me start healing, I hated him because sorry doesn't bring people back. Sorry doesn't undo trauma. Sorry is just a word. But then I started nursing school, and I learned about trauma, about cycles of violence, about how hurt people, about how someone can be both victim and perpetrator, monster and human, all at the same time. I learned that my mother, in her final moment, chose compassion. She told him she had a daughter, not to make him feel guilty, but because she was a mother to her last breath, because even facing death she thought about me first. And I realized that he did the same thing. In his final days he thought about me, a girl he'd never met, a life he'd destroyed, and he tried in his broken way to give something back. It doesn't make what he did okay, nothing makes that okay, but it makes him human, flawed and broken and human. The letter went on. The detective told me about you, about how you stayed with him when everyone else walked away, how you listened to his confessions, how you helped bring closure to 12 families, including mine, how you lost everything because you chose to see him as human instead of just a monster. I don't know if what you did was right or wrong. I think maybe it was both, but I know it was brave, and I know it mattered. My mother used to say that nursing isn't just about healing bodies, it's about witnessing people's humanity, even in their darkest moments, especially in their darkest moments. You did that for a man who didn't deserve it. And because you did, 12 families got answers, 47 criminals went to prison, and I got to become what my mother always wanted me to be. So this letter is to say thank you, and to tell you something I think you need to hear. You didn't fail, you didn't make a mistake, you did what nurses do. You saw someone suffering and you chose compassion over judgment. That's not a weakness, that's not naivety, that's strength. And if you ever want to return to nursing, officially, I've started a petition. 57 families of violent crime victims have signed it. Families whose cases were solved because of Jake Miller's testimony. Families who got closure because you convinced a dying man to tell the truth. we're submitting it to the nursing board, asking them to reconsider, asking them to see what we see, a nurse who embodied the best of what nursing should be. I cried for hours after reading that letter, just sat in my tiny rental house in Eastern Oregon and cried. 5 months later, I was called before the nursing board for a review hearing. Elena was there, so were 8 other family members of Jake's victims. They spoke on my behalf, told the board that my actions, however unorthodox, had brought them something precious: truth, closure, justice. The board reinstated my license with conditions: 2 years probation, mandatory ethics training, regular supervision, but I could practice again. Elena helped me get a job at Seattle Children's Hospital, pediatric oncology unit, working with dying children, using everything I'd learned from Jake about witnessing people in their most vulnerable moments, about choosing compassion even when it's hard, about seeing humanity in the face of death. It's been 5 years now since Jake died. 5 years of rebuilding my life, my career, my sense of self. 5 years of asking myself if what I did was right. I still don't have a clear answer. What I did violated every ethical boundary. I crossed lines that exist for good reasons. I fell in love with a patient. I documented confessions that could have been challenged in court. I risked not just my career but the entire investigation. But 12 families got closure. 47 criminals went to prison. A young woman became a nurse because a dying man chose to give instead of just take. A broken cycle, however small, however imperfect. Last week I visited Jake's grave for the first time. It's in a small cemetery south of Seattle. No flowers, no visitors, just a simple headstone: Jacob Miller, 1984-2018, beloved by someone. I placed flowers there, told him about Elena, about the letter, about the families who'd signed the petition, told him about the children I care for now, how I use what he taught me every single day, how to witness someone's pain without flinching, how to see humanity in the darkest places, how to choose compassion even when it doesn't make sense. You asked me once if monsters could be forgiven, I said to the headstone. I still don't know, but I know you became more than what you were. I know that in your final weeks you chose truth over survival. You chose to give instead of just take. That doesn't erase what you did, but it matters. It has to matter. As I stood there, rain started falling. Soft Seattle rain, the kind that feels like the city is crying. And I thought about something my grandmother once told me, about how her patients in World War II, soldiers dying in field hospitals, would confess things to her in their final moments, not for absolution, just for witness, just to know that someone somewhere knew the truth of who they were. That's what nurses do, she'd said. We witness people's humanity, in birth and death and everything between. We see people at their most vulnerable, their most honest, their most human, and we choose to stay. That's the job. Jake Miller was a monster. He killed 12 people. He destroyed families. He lived a life of violence and crime. Nothing changes that. But he was also a child who was beaten until he couldn't feel anymore. A teenager recruited into violence before he understood what it meant. A man who found the courage, even if born from self-preservation, to tell the truth. He was both monster and victim, criminal and confessor, villain and, in his final weeks, something approaching redemption. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if anything could be enough for what he did. But I know that for 12 families, the truth mattered. For Elena Rodriguez, his final act of giving changed her life. And for me, those weeks in room 412 taught me something fundamental about nursing, about humanity, about the messy complexity of who we are and who we choose to become. We are all capable of terrible things. We are all products of circumstances, trauma, choices made and forced upon us. We are all, every single one of us, both broken and capable of healing. The question isn't whether monsters exist. They do. The question is whether we believe change is possible, whether we believe that even the most broken among us can choose, in their final moments, to be something different. I chose to believe that. In room 412, in the rain, with a dying criminal covered in tattoos and sin, I chose to believe that redemption was possible, that witness mattered, that seeing someone's full humanity, even someone who'd done terrible things, was not naive or dangerous but fundamentally necessary. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I crossed too many lines. Maybe my license should have stayed revoked, my career ended, my name permanently attached to scandal and poor judgment. But when I walk through the pediatric oncology ward now, when I sit with families facing impossible losses, when I hold the hand of a 7-year-old girl who's dying of leukemia and tell her mother that her daughter won't be alone, that someone will stay, that witness matters, I think about Jake. I think about how even at the end of a terrible life, he chose to give something back, how even a monster could, in his final moments, become human enough to care about a stranger's daughter. to want to heal instead of just wound. And I choose to believe that mattered, that every act of choosing differently, no matter how small, how imperfect, how tainted by mixed motives, ripples outward in ways we can't predict. Elena is a nurse now because Jake chose to give. 12 families have closure because I chose to stay. 47 criminals are in prison because a dying man decided truth mattered more than survival. The Crimson Angel, that's what the media called me. The nurse who fell in love with a killer, the woman who believed a monster could change. They weren't entirely wrong. But what they missed, what almost everyone missed, is that it wasn't about love. Not really. It was about witness. About choosing to see someone fully, completely, without flinching from either their humanity or their crimes. That's the hardest thing we do as nurses, not the medical procedures or the long shifts or the emotional toll. The hardest thing is staying present with people in their truth, seeing them as they are, not as we wish they were or fear they might be, just as they are. Jake Miller was a murderer. He was also a broken child, a victim of violence, a man capable of remorse. He was tattooed with sin and at the end, seeking something like redemption. He was human, terribly, beautifully, impossibly human. And I chose to stay, to witness, to believe that even in the darkest places, even in room 412 with a dying criminal, humanity persists. That's not naive, that's not foolish. That's nursing. That's the job.